Chapter 12. The King Behind the Beggar. Odysseus reached the home of Eumaeus, the swineherd who had served his household since childhood. Eumaeus did not recognize the elderly beggar approaching his enclosure, but he welcomed him. He gave Odysseus food, shelter, and a place beside the fire. Then he spoke bitterly about the men occupying the palace. The suitors slaughtered his master's animals faster than the servants could raise them. They consumed the household's wealth while competing to marry Penelope. Eumaeus believed Odysseus was dead, but he remained loyal to him. Odysseus listened without revealing himself. He had returned to Ithaca, but he still did not know whom he could trust. Eumaeus had passed the first test. The next morning, Telemachus arrived. He had returned from his journey seeking news of his father and had avoided the suitors waiting to ambush him at sea. Eumaeus rushed forward and embraced him. Odysseus remained near the fire. He studied the young man entering the hut. Telemachus was no longer the infant he had left behind. He stood before Odysseus as a grown man. 20 years had passed between them. Odysseus had survived Troy, monsters, storms, and shipwrecks. But he had not seen his son take his first steps. He had not taught him to hunt, fight, rule, or judge the men around him. That time could not be reclaimed. Before Odysseus could reveal himself, they needed privacy. Telemachus sent Eumaeus to the palace to tell Penelope that he had returned safely. When the swineherd was gone, Athena appeared outside the hut. She touched Odysseus and removed his disguise. His torn clothing became clean. His back straightened. His face became younger and stronger. When he entered the hut again, Telemachus stepped away. He believed a god stood before him. Odysseus told him the truth. He was his father. Telemachus refused to believe him. The stranger had been an elderly beggar moments earlier. No mortal man could change so completely. Odysseus explained that Athena had hidden him. He had returned after 20 years of war and wandering. No other Odysseus was coming. Telemachus looked at the man before him. Then he saw something beyond the changed face, he believed. Father and son embraced. For a time, neither of them could speak. Odysseus had imagined this reunion during years of captivity and suffering, but he had always imagined returning to a child. Instead, he held a young man he barely knew. They were father and son. They were also strangers. Their grief could not be allowed to last. The suitors still controlled the palace. They had already attempted to kill Telemachus. Odysseus asked how many men they faced. Telemachus described a hall filled with powerful nobles, their servants, and their weapons. There were too many to confront openly. Telemachus warned that even a great warrior could not defeat them alone. Odysseus had not survived 20 years by attacking every enemy from the front. He formed a plan. Telemachus would return to the palace first and act as though nothing had changed. Odysseus would enter later disguised as a beggar. No one could know the king had returned. Telemachus would remove the weapons hanging inside the hall and lock them in the storeroom. When the suitors asked why, he would say the smoke was damaging them, and that armed men drinking together might turn against one another. Odysseus would test the servants. Those who remained loyal would be brought into the plan. Those who served the suitors would reveal themselves. Most importantly, Telemachus had to control his anger. The suitors might insult Odysseus. They might strike him. Telemachus could not interfere. One reckless act would expose them before they were ready. Telemachus agreed. Their first battle together would be a battle of restraint. Telemachus returned to the palace. The following day, Eumaeus led Odysseus toward the city. Along the road, they encountered Melanthius, a goatherd who had abandoned Odysseus's household and joined the suitors. Melanthius mocked the beggar and struck him as he passed. Odysseus kept walking. Every insult gave him information. Every act of cruelty identified another enemy. Near the palace entrance, an old dog lifted his head. His name was Argos. Odysseus had raised him before leaving for Troy. The dog had once been strong and swift. Now he lay neglected outside the gates. Argos recognized his master immediately. His ears moved. His tail struck the ground. Odysseus wanted to approach him, but Eumaeus was watching. He turned his face away and hid his tears. Argos had waited 20 years. After seeing Odysseus return, the old dog lowered his head and died. Odysseus entered his palace. The hall was filled with men eating his food and drinking his wine. They had occupied his tables. They ordered his servants. They spoke of Penelope as though she were a prize that would soon belong to one of them. Odysseus moved among them with his hand extended like any other beggar. Some gave him food. Others laughed. Antinous, the most aggressive of the suitors, accused him of being lazy and struck him with a stool. The blow landed against Odysseus's shoulder. His body tightened. He had killed armed men for less, but striking Antinous now would destroy the plan. Odysseus remained standing. He warned that the gods punished men who abused strangers beneath another man's roof. Antinous laughed. Telemachus watched from across the hall. He gripped his chair but did not move. Odysseus saw his restraint. His son was ready. Throughout the feast, Odysseus studied the room. He counted the doors. He watched which servants obeyed the suitors willingly. He noticed who avoided their eyes. Eumaeus remained loyal. A cattle herder named Philodeus still respected the absent king. Melanthius and several servants had sided with the men consuming the household. The palace was no longer unfamiliar ground. Odysseus was building a map of every threat inside it. That night, while the suitors slept elsewhere, Odysseus and Telemachus removed the shields, spears, and helmets from the hall. They carried them into the storeroom and locked the door. The next step came from Penelope. She had heard that the stranger claimed to possess news of Odysseus. She ordered him brought before her. Odysseus entered the room, still disguised. For the first time in 20 years, he sat before his wife. Penelope's face had changed. Grief and pressure had left their mark on her, but Odysseus recognized her immediately. She did not recognize him. Penelope questioned the stranger carefully. She had heard too many false stories from men seeking rewards. Odysseus created another identity and claimed that he had once welcomed her husband into his home. He described the clothing Odysseus had worn and the clasp that held his cloak. The details were accurate. Penelope wept. Odysseus wanted to cross the room and reveal everything, but the suitors still lived. The servants had not all been tested. One uncontrolled moment could place Penelope in danger. He remained behind the disguise. Penelope ordered the old nurse Eurycleia to wash the stranger's feet. Odysseus had to conceal one more threat. When he was young, a wild boar had cut his leg and left a deep scar. Eurycleia had treated the wound herself. As she washed his feet, her fingers found it. She released his foot in shock. His leg struck the basin, tipping it and spilling the water across the floor. She looked into the beggar's face and recognized the child she had once cared for. Odysseus caught her before she could speak. He made her swear to remain silent. Eurycleia obeyed. She offered to name the women who had betrayed the household. Odysseus stopped her. He would judge them himself. Before leaving, Penelope told the stranger what she planned to do. The next day, she would bring out Odysseus's bow. She would line up 12 axe heads. The man who could string the bow and shoot an arrow through them would become her husband. Odysseus understood the opportunity immediately. The contest would place his weapon in the center of the hall. It would gather every suitor in one room. It would make them watch while the means of their destruction was placed in his hands. The next morning, Penelope entered the hall carrying the bow. The suitors stared at it. They had competed for Odysseus's wife, land and title. Now they would be measured against the man they believed was dead. Telemachus arranged the axes. Then he tried the bow himself. He tried once, then twice more. On his 4th attempt, he was about to string it. Odysseus gave him a small signal. Telemachus stopped. It was not yet time to reveal his strength. The suitors took their turns, one after another. They failed. They warmed the bow and rubbed it with fat, believing age had made it too stiff. Still, they could not bend it far enough to attach the string. Their confidence became embarrassment. The disguised Odysseus left the hall and called Eumaeus and Philotius aside. He asked what they would do if their king returned. Both men said they would fight for him. Odysseus showed them the scar on his leg. He revealed his name. The loyal servants wept, but Odysseus stopped them. There was no time. He gave them their orders. The courtyard gates had to be locked. The women had to remain in their rooms. Eumaeus would place the bow in Odysseus's hands. They returned to the hall. Odysseus asked to try. The suitors protested. They feared the humiliation of watching a beggar succeed where they had failed. Penelope argued that the stranger should be allowed a chance. Telemachus took control of the room. He told his mother that the bow and the contest were now his responsibility. Then he sent her upstairs. Penelope left without knowing what was about to happen. Eumaeus carried the bow across the hall. The suitors shouted at him to stop. He continued walking. He placed it in Odysseus's hands. The room became quiet. Odysseus examined the weapon for cracks or damage. Then he bent it and attached the string in one controlled movement. The sound cut through the hall. The suitors stared. Odysseus placed an arrow against the string. He aimed through the line of axe heads. The arrow passed cleanly through all 12. Telemachus moved to his father's side with a spear in his hand. The contest was over. Odysseus threw aside his rags and moved to the threshold with the bow and arrows. Antinous was lifting a cup to drink when Odysseus fired. The arrow struck him, and he fell across the table. For a moment, the others believed the shot had been an accident. Then Odysseus revealed who stood before them. The king of Ithaca had returned. The suitors searched the walls for weapons. The shields and spears were gone. Eurymachus tried to negotiate. He blamed Antinous for everything. He promised that the surviving men would repay the food, livestock, and treasure they had consumed. Odysseus refused. They had invaded his home. They had abused strangers beneath his roof. They had pressured his wife. They had plotted to murder his son. Payment could replace livestock. It could not erase what they had done. Eurymachus drew his sword and charged. Odysseus fired. The battle began. Telemachus fought beside his father. Eumaeus and Philotius held the entrances. The narrow doorway prevented the suitors from surrounding them. Odysseus controlled the room with the bow, while Telemachus guarded his side. Then Telemachus made a mistake. After retrieving armor from the storeroom, he failed to secure the door. Melanthius found it open. The traitorous goatherd carried shields and spears back to the suitors. Odysseus saw armed men appearing in the hall and understood what had happened. Their advantage was disappearing. Telemachus admitted his error. There was no time for blame. Odysseus ordered Eumaeus and Philotius to watch the storeroom. They caught Melanthius when he returned for more weapons and prevented him from helping the suitors again. Athena entered the hall disguised as Mentor. She challenged Odysseus to prove that his courage had survived the journey. She did not end the battle for him. She tested Odysseus and Telemachus. The suitors hurled their spears. Athena turned them away from their targets. Then she raised her aegis and drove the remaining men into panic. Odysseus, Telemachus, Eumaeus, and Philotius still had to hold their ground. The suitors attacked together. The 4 defenders remained close and refused to break formation. The suitors had numbers. Odysseus had preparation, position, and men he trusted. One by one, the attackers fell. When the fighting ended, Odysseus did not kill everyone inside the hall. The servants who had remained loyal were protected. Eurycleia was then ordered to identify the women who had knowingly betrayed the household. 12 were separated from those who had remained loyal and were punished for their actions. The palace had been reclaimed, but Odysseus had not yet returned to Penelope. He knew the families of the suitors would soon learn what had happened. The palace needed time before the news spread through Ithaca. Odysseus ordered music and dancing inside the hall. From outside, it would sound as though Penelope had finally chosen a husband and a wedding celebration had begun. The deception would delay anyone from discovering the truth. Eurycleia rushed upstairs and told Penelope that her husband was alive. Penelope did not believe her. For 20 years she had survived by distrusting promises. She had resisted more than 100 men through delay, careful words, and deception. She would not abandon that caution because an old nurse brought impossible news. Penelope entered the hall. Odysseus was still dressed in the clothing of the beggar. She studied him but kept her distance. Telemachus became angry. He could not understand why his mother refused to embrace the man who had recovered their home. Odysseus understood. Penelope was doing exactly what he had done since reaching Ithaca. She was testing the person in front of her. Odysseus was then washed and dressed. Athena made him appear taller, stronger, and more imposing. Still, Penelope remained cautious. She ordered Euryclea to move their marriage bed from the chamber and prepare it elsewhere. Odysseus reacted immediately. The bed could not be moved. He had built it himself. A strong olive tree had grown where he constructed their chamber. He had cut and shaped its trunk into one of the bedposts. Then he had built the room around it. The bed remained rooted in the ground. It could only be moved if someone cut through the olive trunk. Almost no one knew how the bed had been made. The secret was known only to Odysseus, Penelope, and one trusted servant who had guarded their chamber. Penelope's caution broke. She crossed the room and embraced him. The bow had proved that Odysseus still possessed his strength. The scar had proved his identity to Euryclea. The bed proved it to Penelope. It was not a story from Troy. It was not a victory won before an army. It was something they had built together before the war separated them. Odysseus had returned older, hardened, and changed. Penelope had survived 20 years of pressure without knowing whether he lived. Neither of them was the person the other remembered, but the bed remained where they had placed it. Odysseus told Penelope what had happened during the years they were separated. Then he admitted that one final obligation remained. Tiresias had commanded him to carry an oar inland until he reached people who knew nothing of the sea. He would know he had reached them when someone mistook the oar for a tool used to separate grain. There he would make offerings to Poseidon and finally end the god's anger. He had reached his home, but even now, one final journey waited beyond it. For one night, Odysseus allowed himself to rest. He held his wife. He was home. The danger had not completely ended. The following day, Odysseus went to the farm where his father Laertes lived in grief and isolation. His father recognized him. Another part of the family was restored. Then news arrived. The families of the dead suitors had gathered weapons. They wanted revenge. Antinous' father led them toward the farm. Odysseus, Telemachus, Laertes, Eumaeus, Philotius, the elderly servant Dolius, and Dolius's 6 sons prepared to fight. The cycle was beginning again. Another group of fathers and sons stood ready to kill one another. Laertes struck down Antinos's father. Athena ordered both sides to stop. The attackers dropped their weapons and fled. But Odysseus moved after them. He was ready to continue the pursuit. Zeus cast a thunderbolt before Athena. She warned Odysseus to end the fighting before Zeus turned against him. This time, Odysseus obeyed. The weapons were lowered. Peace was made between the two sides. Odysseus had returned to Ithaca as a beggar. He had endured humiliation inside his own house. He had learned who remained loyal. He had fought beside the son he had never raised. He had been tested by the wife who had refused to forget him. The journey had taken his crew, his youth, and 20 years of his life, but it had not taken his name. For the first time since he sailed for Troy, Odysseus had no disguise to wear, no false identity to invent, and no enemy standing between him and his family. The king of Ithaca was home.